I'm delighted to open this conference on contesting public spaces, the religious factor. Now, were it not about the religious factor, I'd probably ask to present on contesting university offices. As head of, director of an institute, as a department chair, the fights over rooms are just unbelievable. It would be a great paper. My best is something that's not resolved yet, and in the communication department, we discovered there was a room we never knew existed. It was a door that was never opened, and behind it was a room, and we lived there for years, and we didn't know there was a room because we never saw the door opened. When we asked for the room, the person who had title to the room would not give it up. It was never opened. He never was in there. Anyway, this is the religious factor, so I couldn't take anything from my experience, so I started, I opened the Bible. And lo and behold, from pretty much in the beginning, the people are nomads in Genesis mainly, so space is like a little more loose and free than we are used to now. But there was a contested space. The first one I came across was the Tower of Babel, in which actually it wasn't space in the horizontal space sense, but in the vertical space, building to the heaven, and it was contested between man and God. The only way God could win the contest was by breaking down communications between the builders. The next contest I found, which was very polite, and it was more an argument than a contest, was about when Abraham decides that he has to stop being a nomad, he has to bury his wife. There begins negotiations between Abraham and the Canaanites in the Hebron area about title to the tomb of the sepulcher of the Machpelah. And I went over the text actually, and it was very polite, but it was kind of a polite contest, and there was just one word that keeps on creeping up in the text. Abraham asks for, I'm a stranger and a sojourner with you, give me a possession of a burying place with you, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. And the answer is, hear us, my Lord, thou art a mighty prince, and none of us shall withhold from thee his sepulcher. And he responds, hear me and entreat me for a fallen. And the fallen replies, hear me, the field I give thee, and on, hear me, hear me, hear me. If there's a lesson to learn out of this, is that when there is a contested space and there is a contest, what is extremely important, unlike the case of the Tower of Babel in which the languages were separated so people could not negotiate, one has to hear, one has to really listen to the claims of either side. That apparently is the way these kinds of things can be worked out. At least we trust that is the case in an institute dedicated for research into peaceful resolution of conflicts. However, being in Jerusalem, a contested area, obviously the issue is extremely relevant, dramatically relevant, as we thoroughly know. And I think hearing the other side, listening to contestants over space as well as over other things that they regarded important, is extremely important. So I think there won't be a lecture about the Tower of Babel, nor about the Machpelah tomb, nor about university offices, but the variety and scope of what we will be hearing today is tremendous and extremely interesting. Sidna Ali, Bnei Brak streets, Baka, or is it Katamon, and Nicosia, the Bayraktar Mosque, and so on and so forth. Extremely fascinating episodes of contest over space, and we can think of no better conveners, or only two people could convene this kind of amazingly creative and at the same time focused conference. Our guest, Professor Richard Hecht from the University of California at Santa Barbara, has Jerusalem as his second home, and as we were speaking, I asked him if he gets to work or he's engulfed in what events that transpire in Jerusalem, and he says, what do you mean? The two are the same for me. Walking the streets of Jerusalem is my work. He combines the religious studies, cultural studies, and workaday issues, and merges them into this exciting kind of agenda for research that we will be looking at. And he's collaborating with our veteran Truman Fellow Yitzhak Reiter, who is one of the foremost experts on the contest taking place here and now where we are in Jerusalem. And I think this collaboration is terrific, and it gave rise to this event. There's a contest over this event between two institutions. The Truman Institute, who is hosting it, and the Adenauer Stiftung. Both the two organizations or institutions very harmoniously are running this, administratively running this excellent research opportunity. And there is a contested person who's torn between two spaces, who is Michael Mertes, the head of the Adenauer Stiftung. And he's in charge now temporarily. He's the head of the Israel office, the Jerusalem office, but temporarily also head of the West Bank office. And today he had to be in Ramallah. Annika Kano is going to replace him and speak on behalf of the Adenauer Stiftung, and Hildegard Mohr will read us what Michael wanted to convey to the convener, to us here.
Okay, so first of all, I would like to welcome all of you for being here, and would like to say thank you, first of all, to you, Menachem, for giving us the chance to be partner in such an interesting conference, which of course also goes then to Professor Richard Hecht and Professor Yitzhak Reiter. So thank you very much for organizing this conference, which is very interesting, and it was a very short notice that we could participate on this conference, which we're very, very happy about. And I also would like to say it basically also is kind of a new start of partnership with the Truman Institute and the Adenauer Stiftung are since many, many years good partners, but in the last years it became a bit less, and it was reduced to an opinion poll that we do together, which is also together with our office in Ramallah and with Professor Shikake from Ramallah, which is very, very important, I believe, and looking forward to the next opinion poll, which will come out in December, and it will be very interesting after everything that's happening at the moment. But I'm very happy that we finally start also to go deeper into partnership again with Menachem as the new director of the Truman Institute. So I hope that it will be a very fruitful and good cooperation. I'm sure of it. So thank you for this opportunity, and thanks also all the other people from Truman Institute, like Nama and Cheryl and everybody else who helped in organizing it. I think it's also important to mention that. And I'd like to apologize in the name of our director, Michael Mertes, that Hildegard will read the text that he prepared for you. Due to the complicated situation at the moment, he had to be today in our Ramallah office. And it's a shame, because this conference and this subject was very dear and very important to him. So I hope we can convey him the message afterwards. And so we'll I sent you his regards, and let Hildegard read what Michael said. And just thanks again for coming here, and thanks to everybody.
Good morning. You heard it twice now. I am sad and glad. Sad because Michael cannot be with us, and he sends his regards. In a few seconds I will read you his greetings. And glad that I can be here, that I have the chance to be with you today. Thank you so much. Dear Professor Blondheim, dear Professor Reiter, and dear Professor Hecht, ladies and gentlemen, I've asked my colleagues Hildegard Mohr and Annika Kano to convey my warm regards to all of you on behalf of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung Israel. Please accept my apologies for not being able to attend this very important conference. I have to be in Ramallah today, where I am temporarily in charge of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung's office for the Palestinian territories. The Konrad Adenauer Stiftung is a German political foundation that needs a word of explanation. Political foundations came into being in West Germany in the 1950s And their first task was civic education at home, with a view to empowering citizens to play an active political part in the Federal Republic's fledgling democracy. Today, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung combines civic education at home, exchange of ideas abroad, dialogue between societies, cultures, and religions, as well as think tank work at the national and international levels. We are independent of, but associated with, the Christian Democratic Union of Germany, the party of Chancellor Angela Merkel, who is a member of our board. We have been active in international cooperation for half a century this year, and we are present in all over the world with some 80 offices reaching out to more than 120 countries. In the greater region of North Africa and the Middle East, the Stiftung is represented in capitals from Rabat to Ankara, and there is a very close cooperation between our offices in Jerusalem, Ramallah, and Amman. Last but not least, the Stiftung's Israel office is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. Coming from Europe to the Middle East is like traveling from a secular planet to a planet where religion is a crucial element of the public sphere. In that respect, it seems as if Europe on one side and North Africa and the Middle East on the other, including Israel and Turkey, are drifting apart like tectonic plates. Being close to the German and European Christian Democrats, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung has always been a strong supporter of intercultural and interfaith dialogue. I was told some time ago that the Christian Democrats are the Christian equivalent to the Muslim brothers. There are the Christian brothers, so to speak. Well, there are some minor differences between us and them. First of all, we are brothers and sisters. Most importantly, we believe in the separation of church and state, mosque and state, synagogue of state and state. However, we also believe that religion is not simply an individual private affair. Faith communities have a significant position in the fabric of a vibrant civil society. They influence the way billions of people on our planet think and behave. Secondly, even a secular liberal democracy is based on fundamental values which transcend it and of which it cannot dispose. Last but not least, religion can be, and all too often is, a source of violence because it is a crucial element of people's individual and collective identities, and because it vindicates the use of force in the eyes of its adherents. In short, today's conference deals with a subject of greatest relevance to the work of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung in Israel, as well as to its worldwide activities, and we are proud to be a partner in this project. I wish you all an inspiring day. All the best, Michael Mertes.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, let me thank from both Yitzhak and myself the Truman Institute and the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, and of course the Hebrew University for supporting this idea of a conference which Yitzhak and I had during, I guess, last August. And from the very beginning, the institutional support for us was absolutely first rate. I must tell you that I'm exceedingly delighted to be here with you for a number of reasons. Some of you, I know your work. I've had opportunities to read bits and pieces of it, and the idea of participating in a conference and learning from you is so exciting to me that I'm really, it's absolutely a delight. It's the greatest thing that could happen. Secondly, to participate in the development of a conference with Yitzhak Ryder, who, in my opinion, is one of the really world experts in the issue of sacred spaces and contestation, and especially the issues that are related to Israel, Jews and Muslims here, is absolutely extraordinary. And I'm so thankful to Yitzhak for collaborating with me on this project and facilitating my stay here at the Truman Institute. And so thank you very, very much. Now, I hope that today is going to be very challenging for all of us. And I wrote an introduction to this, which is perhaps it lays out in some general way some of the issues that we will address in our discussions and your various presentations. But let me begin with something that I think is often overlooked now, because everyone seems to have gotten on the bandwagon of religion. Everyone recognizes it now as being so important. But we must remember that social theorists of the last century were absolutely certain that by the end of their century, the 20th century, religion would have disappeared. We would have vanquished the last remnants of human superstition. It would be erased by progress, by social developments, by science, and by rationalism. Of course, events of the past 30 years or so have proven their best predictions to be false. The Messiah of modernism has tarried, and religion is now a critical, if not dominant, factor in all of our worlds. Some might argue that we are in the midst of a global religious awakening. Historians of American religions often speak of, in the history of American history, 3 or 4 great awakenings, periods in which there was intense religious expression and experience that structured the course of American history and culture. The first of these, as some of you know, spanned the period from approximately 1720 to 1750 and was led by theologian preachers like Jonathan Edwards, whose, quote, democracy of the spirit contributed ultimately to the American Revolution. The second of the Great Awakenings took place in the last decades of the 18th century and lasted until the middle of the 19th century. Now you have to be careful because historians are very slippery with their periodization, right? We battle about when does something start and when does something end. So you'll realize that these dates for the awakenings are a little slippery. But the second Great Awakening lasted from the last decades of the 18th century until the middle of the 19th. This awakening was localized in the northeastern states, especially in the western reaches of New York, in what became known as the Burnt-Over District, aptly named for the famous waves of religious enthusiasms which swept through its towns and villages. These were the birthings of many new religious movements, some lasting only a few months or years, and others, like the Latter-day Saints of Jesus Christ, became permanent fixtures in the American religious landscape. And since I wrote this before the election 2 weeks ago, I figured there's some little reference to someone who will disappear in American politics now, but we'll go on. This awakening also generated religious social movements like the abolitionists, who influenced the politics and culture which would lead to the American Civil War. The third awakening spanned the second half of the 19th century through the first decade of the 20th century and saw the emergence of new Christian denominations like the Pentecostal churches, which intensified religious experience, and others like the YMCA and the settlement movement, which were characterized by a turn to the social workings of religion, or what Walter Rauschenbach called the social gospel. This third awakening also had substantial impact upon Reform Judaism in the United States as well as Catholicism. There are scholars, of course, who suggest there was also a fourth awakening, which I think involves our research and our concerns today. This fourth awakening, the scholars suggest, spanned the 1960s, the 70s, and the 1980s, and was characterized by the decline of the mainline Protestant churches, Protestant traditions, and the extraordinary explosive growth in the United States of evangelical Christianity. The religious authority of these mainline traditions was eroded and was replaced by radical individualization, one manifestation of which was labeled by Robert Bellah and his colleagues in their famous Habits of the Heart, Sheilaism. The American religious landscape, which was once highly organized and stratified, became chaotic, with religious authority swinging from hierarchy to highly charged charismatic movements. And when this was combined with the immigration of the Immigration Reform Act of 1965, religions which had been only peripheral in the American landscape became, for the first time, a very significant presence in our religious life. Now the linkage to what we are doing. The Fourth Awakening might also be viewed as the American form of the global religious awakening, which began almost at the very same time. Few nations have not experienced this global religious awakening. Few, if any, religious traditions have not witnessed the gravitational pull of it. If the French Revolution swept away the ancient regime, this global religious awakening has enormous implications, as we know, for its progeny, the nation state. The French anthropologist Marc Auger, in his Non-Places, An Introduction to Supermodernity, which was originally published in 1992, argued that the global world, with its superabundance, has created a radical homogeneity of place. All of us know that. Every airport looks exactly like every other airport. Every shopping mall looks exactly like every other shopping mall. I know that the Alrove is very special, but I remember the old Mamilla and the Alrove with the Skechers and the Crocs and all the else. It's just like Santa Barbara. And I sort of preferred the old Mamilla, but anyway, the sense of everything being reduced to the same. Airports, malls, shopping centers, and that constant muzak in our ears. All the same, and intended, as Marc Auger believes, to make us feel that we belong to some new utopian world that all of us participate in. Auger also points out, and here I think is a very important and insightful comment, that in this new utopian sameness, space becomes a form of resistance to the global sameness and the loss of identity. Space becomes a citadel for uniqueness and identity. Auger's analysis of supermodernity helps us to understand why place continues to matter for people and why spatial studies is one of the new inter- or cross-disciplinary academic fields which has emerged. Of course, all polities must control space, both physically and also the explicit and implicit meanings of the nation's body. The modern nation state either separated religion from its space or in some way tried to control it. Of course, this was a completely arbitrary arrangement because religious traditions are always about space. They are, a religious tradition is a constitution, a political constitution, and a temporal constitution, and a spatial constitution. The United States, as only one example, tried to separate religion and state in our First Amendment of the Constitution, which states, at least in the initial part, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. which American constitutional law separated into two clauses, one called the Establishment Clause and the other the Free Exercise Clause. The high wall of separation was constructed in the earliest years of the Republic, yet it has been challenged almost from the beginning. Is prayer in public schools constitutional? Can students be excused from public education to attend religious schools? Can various religious doctrines such as creation science or intelligent design be taught in public schools? Can religious symbols be displayed in public buildings such as courts? Must private businesses provide time and space for prayer? All of these are examples of how space has become involved in various kinds of contestations. Now, Israel, I think, provides one of the most fantastic laboratories to see the workings of these contestations in a comparative context. And thus, as Yitzhak and I thought about how to divide our discussions over the course of the day, we thought of 4 different kinds of sections, which you see in the program in front of you. So we want to begin with a consideration of place, space, and cultures. Then we'll look at some papers that deal with the contested re-sanctifications. Often it's thought by sociologists that you only have secularization or desanctification. Of course, most sociologists today are much more, I think, enlightened, and they see sanctification and secularization going hand in hand. So we want to look at these contested re-sanctifications. And then we'll look at the spaces of civic resistance, and finally, as we call it, the spaces of nations. So all of this is ahead of us today. Now, we have had guests who have come a long distance. I'd like to especially welcome Beatrice Hendrich, who has come to join us. She's going to be speaking in the first panel, but we want to express a special welcome to you. Now, our plan, Yitzhak's and my plan with you, is to publish these papers from today's discussion. And I found, and maybe your experience is the same, that you can really produce a great volume if there's furious discussion with each of the papers. Maybe furious is not the best term, but it's certainly a stimulating discussion. Now, I've been like others of you who I've just sat in conferences and I've loved it, and I wanted to speak. And there's a role for you folks too. Often questions that come from the audience, the people who are not necessarily participants, are exceedingly helpful in the writers of scholarly papers in clarifying their ideas and making them, in a sense, more accessible. So we as the presenters and you as, I hope, the participants both have very important roles with one another. So with that, I'd like now to turn to the first session, which you see is Place, Space, and Cultures. And we have had to change the schedule. Ahmad Natour, who is the president of the Sharia Court of Appeals and teaches Islamic law at Netanya Academic College and Tel Aviv University Law School, injured his leg at home. And he sends his deep regrets of not being able to be here this morning with us. But he has told us that he plans to contribute the presentation that he would make today to the volume that we are hoping to publish. So we're very sad not to have Ahmad Natour with us today. So that means that Eliav Taub and Avi Sasson are going to be the first presenters. And Eliav Taub is a member of the Department of Political Science at Ashkelon Academic College and a lecturer in the Combined Social Science Department of Bar Ilan University. His research focuses are on the status of various social groups, including new immigrants and the Haredim. And Dr. Avi Sasson is a senior lecturer in the Eretz Yisrael Studies Department of the Ashkelon Academic College. His research is about holy spaces in Israel and the daily life in Israel during the Ottoman period. He has published several papers and books surrounding these issues. So what I would like is to have Avi, who's going to make the presentation, I believe. Eliav, make the presentation. And what we're going to do is we'll go through the presentations, and then at the end of both presentations in this first session, we'll have a discussion. Is that okay? All right? So, while we're getting set up here, every good conference has to have someone who can actually do things for the professors, the organizers. And so Matt Markham, who has written to many of you, has been our person who's affected this conference. I'd like to thank him from both Yitzhak and myself, as well as all of the participants, for his help with us in organizing this conference. Will you join me in thanking
Good morning. The reciprocal relations between Atra Kadisha as a religious organization and the Israel Antiquities Authority as a bureaucratic organization and their influence on the public space in Israel. Atra Kadisha is a Haredi ultra-Orthodox organization which belongs to the radical stream in Israel. The organization is in the forefront of the battle against the excavation of ancient graves and the study of the finds for fear of desecrating the dignity of the dead. In the past 3 decades, Atra Kadisha's battle against the government authorities have been bearing fruit, to the point where it can be said that in the past decade there has been almost no excavation of graves in which Atra Kadisha has not taken an active and sometimes decisive part. Frequently, the considerations of Atra Kadisha as a religious organization overcome the considerations of the professional and authoritative bureaucratic bodies. For the sake of comparison, today there is no country in the world, with the exception of the state of Israel, where human bones found in archaeological digs are handed over for burial without scientific examination. Even in other theocracies or those with a religious government, such as Iran, Pakistan, or Sudan, bones discovered in archaeological digs are examined. In other places where there was friction due to the discovery of ancient bones, such as the United States or in Australia, where there was writing by the natives peoples who claimed that scientists as desecrate their ancestors' bones, agreements were reached and include examination of the bones. The first period of Antiquities authority that we will discuss is when, for the first time since 1948, on April 1st, 1990, it was transformed from a department of the Education Ministry into the Antiquities Authority, henceforth AA, with a statutory status as it the case today. During this period, when it was headed by the late Amir Drori, the AA grew fourfold compared to the previous period and conducted over 10 times as many excavations in Israel. During Drori's tenure, impressive housing and industrial development projects were conducted in Israel, and many roads were paved, first and foremost the Trans-Israeli Highway. In professional terms, there were surveys and digs in areas about to be damaged by construction. Agreements were reached with the implementing bodies that if there were any finds of great scientific importance, construction plans would be changed in order to preserve the archaeological sites in those areas. The dispute between the AA and the Haredi groups surrounding the excavation of graves in development areas received extensive publicity. Drori saw himself as a representative of the government and refused to be flexible and to accept the status of the Haredi groups, including Atra Kadisha, which wanted to be involved in the excavations. We believe that in theory, AA policy under Drori can be classified as a bureaucratization. By expanding the number of excavations which involved financial and scientific partnership with universities on the one hand and a firm stance towards the Haredim on the other, the AA clearly expanded its involvement and its objectives, which had formerly focused on preservation. An example is the initiative for government-financed archaeological digs and the development of central antiquity sites, which provided jobs for the unemployed. Another example is the AA involvement in negotiations and agreements with the Palestinians on antiquities in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. It should be noted that the AA's viewpoint was that its view was what the Israeli government would adopt. In some ways, the peak of the conflict between the Haredi organization Atra Kadisha and the AA relates to excavations where human bones were found at the sites in Mamila in Jerusalem and at Dromeda Hill in Jaffa. The first example is the case of the excavation in Mamila. On November 22nd, 1992, the Haredim discovered the excavations. Within a short time, they organized a demonstration at the site that ended in violence. Atra Kadisha refused to accept the conclusion of the archaeologists and the Greek Orthodox Church, who thought there was a reasonable possibility that it was a Christian burial cave. 2 months later, when the excavation ended and the hundreds of sacks of bones were removed without coordination with Atra Kadisha, once again the Haredim rioted and there were even some people injured. In late 1993, AA Director Ahmad Drori agreed to transfer the bones to the Religious Affairs Ministry until it was decided what to do with them, but not to Atra Kadisha. In reaction, Atra Kadisha activists took possession of the bones and buried them in the Jewish cemetery in Moshav Yesodot. In this case, we can see the firm policy adopted by the AA when it did not enable the Haredi organization or the Religious Affairs Ministry to decide about the bones. The AA also refused to give in or even to have contacts with the Haredi groups. In light of the repeated clashes with the Haredi groups concerning the excavation of ancient graves, the Israeli government decided to remove findings of human bones from the general definition of the Antiquities law. Attorney General Michael Ben Yair relied on the definition in the Antiquities law. An antiquity is any object, whether uprooted or attached, which was created by human prior to the year 1700, or one that was made by humans beginning in the year 1700, which is of historical value. He published a legal opinion regarding the proper treatment of ancient bones. This was done with deliberate intention of preventing the investigation of bones discovered in the State of Israel. As a result, and in accordance with the interpretation of the law, in 1994, the Attorney General issued an order ruling that human bones are not defined as antiquities. Procedure requires that when a human bone is discovered, it is transferred to the Religious Affairs Ministry for burial. In this decision, the State of Israel, in effect, is separating human bones from other archaeological finds, granting them a special status, and insulating them from the accepted definition of archaeological finds antiquities. As a result, procedures were instituted was proposes to preserve ancient human bones according to Jewish halachic standards, Jewish law. By doing so, to remove them from the jurisdiction of the AA, which by law is the authorized body for handling all issues related to antiquities and which is permitted to carry out excavation, preservation and restoration and maintenance. The AA councils decided on 2003 that the handling of bones at all stages, gathering and removing them, would be done in rather than the accepted policy regarding antiquities accordance with the Jewish law. Both by mandating the handling of bones according to the halacha and by including the religious affairs ministry in the process, the state in effect authorized religious groups for preserving antiquities to be involved in archaeological digs. The state demonstrated flexibility in its bureaucratic policy towards groups that are sensitive to this issue. A major change in AA policy towards Atra, Kadisha and other Haredi groups took place when Shuka Dorfman became Director General of the AA on 2000. In the past decade, Dorfman began to adopt a more conciliatory policy that his predecessor did towards Atra, Kadisha and other Haredi groups, such as the association to prevent the desecration of graves of the different Haredi functions and contractors who need to dig on their land. At Dorfman time, the Antiquities Authority Council decided that when ancient bones are discovered, it is not sufficient to transfer them to the Religious Affairs Ministry as required by procedure. They decided that there must be talks with the Haredi world and it must be treated as a full partner. In addition, the bones should not be transferred to the Religious Affairs Ministry and should not be handled at all, but the work should be stopped and the findings report to the Haredi and the findings report to the Haredi groups. The AA also did away with its responsibility for the digs in order to reduce contact with the Haredi groups and transferred responsibility for the excavations onto the group that was commissioned the excavation. The AA itself is only a contractor for implementation. In other words, it has a secondary role in the excavation process. In these decisions, the AA in effect adopt an approach of debureaucratization. It is willing to waive its central role in excavation and uniform bureaucratic regulations by ruling that every case will be judged on its own merits. The AA also demonstrated reactiveness towards Haredi groups through its stated policy of willingness to compromise with them. In other words, the AA is interested in finding solutions that will be acceptable to the various sides, while the role of the AA in the balance of powers is not as central as it was until now. In an examination of the AA data, it was found that of about 119 rescue digs, restoration of digs that have been damaged, carried out between 2003 till 2011, 102 of them were carried out with full consent and coordination between the AA and Atra Kadisha. In the two excavations at Akko interchange in 2004 and in section 18 of Route 6, Kibbutz Regavim, consent came following a violent protest by the Haredim. Finally, intervention at the highest levels of government, a postponement in the work that cost at least tens of millions of shekels, and the change in the conditions on the ground provided the only solution. This data prove that the relationship between the AA and Atra Kadisha are of far-reaching significance that affects the public, political, religious, and geographical space in the State of Israel. It should be noted that almost all of the coordination between the AA and Atra Kadisha was without unusual and violent events, and only a few cases, about 17 excavations, included a unilateral reaction by the AA, whether in taking action after only informing Atra Kadisha, lack of coordination, or coordination following a battle. The public consequences of the agreements between the AA and Atra Kadisha resulted in most instances at 49 excavation sites in an actual change of the construction and development plans in the area, and therefore to a change in public space in Israel. Only at 39 sites did the plans remain in place, even though bones were found in the area. In 29 times, there were developments that were unrelated to the reciprocal relations between Atra Kadisha and the AA, such as the collapse of burial caves. The reciprocal relations and agreements between the AA and Atra Kadisha regarding ancient bones and graves can be explained by means of the theory of advocacy coalitions. An advocacy coalition is a coalition with shared beliefs and core values, and in this case, an agreement between the State of Israel and the Haredim that an inspection should be made of antiquities and finds relating to bones in order to avoid dishonoring the dead. A subsystem of advocacy coalition is composed of players and various public and private organizations that are actively concerned about the problem of policy. The Religious Affairs Ministry, the AA, and Atra Kadisha are all concerned about the handling of bones due to their shared core values. And in fact, a number of senior archaeologists have blamed the AA chairman Shuka Dorfman of betraying his job and waiving the enforcement of the Antiquities law in order to maintain cooperation between the AA and Atra Kadisha. The construction of the new emergency room in the Barzilai Medical Center in Ashkelon is an example of the incident of excavating graves in which the coalition of government ministers and Atra Kadisha were involved. In the end, the problem was not solved through cooperation between the coalition members due to harsh public criticism. The result that the Prime Minister ordered the removal of the graves and the bones, the decision which, as mentioned, broke the advocacy coalition relationship between Atra Kadisha and the AA. In summary, in the past decade, the attitude of the authorities to Atra Kadisha has been characterized by agreement and coordination as advocacy coalition. In addition, the change in AA policy in this decade can be described as a switch from bureaucratization to debureaucratization, instead of in terms of the treatment of ancient bones and graves. This approach influences the public space in Israel, since construction plans were changed in half the excavation sites. In terms of reciprocal relations between the AA and the Atra Kadisha, we can see the reactiveness and responsiveness to the sensitives of Atra Kadisha. Since we analyzed the findings using the theory of advocacy coalition, we can conclude that public and media pressure are likely to disband the advocacy coalitions, as happened in the case of Barzilai Medical Center in Ashkelon. What does the future have in store in terms of relationship between these advocacy coalitions? Since there is understanding between the coalitions, namely Atra, Kadisha, and the Israeli government, regarding core values such as respect for the dead and the special attitude towards bonds, no great change is anticipated. We believe that such upheavals provided an opportunity for a major policy change, but such a change will not take place unless the opportunity is skillfully exploited by those who support the change. Thank you.
Now, again, what we're going to do is we're going to ask you well, we'll start with Beatrice next, right? And then we'll have the questions and comments, right? That's what we'll do. So, Beatrice, do you want to come up here, please?
Yeah.
Let me just say a word or two to introduce Beatrice to us. Beatrice is the Marie Curie Research Fellow at the Department of Turkish and Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Cyprus in Nicosia. And her research focuses on narrative construction of religious identity among Turks and Muslims in Cyprus after 1025. Cyprus actually is one of the most fantastic places to do this kind of research. And it's delightful to have you here. Beatrice has been a research fellow at the Collaborative Research Center and its programs in the cultures of memory from 2007 to 2008, and previously from 2000 to 2004. Beatrice, of course, as you see from the program, is going to speak on the Bayraktar Mosque in Nicosia. Thank you again for coming.
Good morning to everybody, and thank you for the kind invitation. I was very glad when I get it, and finally I'm very glad that I came here and that you made me come here. And yes, so the first presentation was a very comprehensive one, all encompassing, and mine is more a case study. And I'm going to talk on the Bayraktar Mosque in Nicosia, a small religious site at a prominent place. And the Bayraktar Mosque at Shrine in Nicosia is an Ottoman monument erected and complemented throughout the centuries as a memorial for the flag bearer, the Bayraktar, of the campaign in 1570 when the Ottomans conquered Nicosia. The one-aisled mosque with its single minaret stands on a bastion of the Venetian walls of Nicosia, which encircle the historic city. Today, the Bayraktar, respectively the area marked by the mosque, is both contested and contesting in several manners. In the divided city of Nicosia, it is located in its southern part of Nicosia, that is to say the area under control of the government, also known as the Greek Christian south of Cyprus. So the mosque is, in terms of religion and ethnicity, located at the, in quotation marks, wrong side. It is a landmark that reminds, from a Greek Cypriot perspective, on the historic intrusion and ongoing existence of the religion of Islam in Cyprus. In the 60s of the last century, the mosque was damaged by bomb attacks, and the responsibility for the attack of 1962 is still a contentious issue between Turkey and Cyprus. Okay, I skip this. The presentation, I hope, will demonstrate how between 1962 and 2012 the narrative on the Bayraktar Mosque has been transforming and creating different sub-stories. But I will also mention very shortly the current political administrative situation and the religious functioning of this mosque. So my presentation consists of the following parts: the foundation myth, or the Deli Chafer, the flag bearer, the bomb attacks of 1962 and 63. I'm going to talk about 62 actually. The, let's say, Bayraktar revival in 2010, and then we are coming to the present, where we have a new commemoration day, or from flag bearer to journalist, and we have the making of, let's call, a new separate Muslimity related to Bayraktar site. So, as I said, this mosque stands on the bastion of the Venetian walls of Nicosia. It is a comparatively small one-aisled masjid with one minaret in a very typical Nicosian style. Yellow sandstone and white wall color with a small garden around it. The mosque hall is, let's say, attached to a turba, to a mausoleum of the flag bearer or not. The documents suggest that on this bastion at the wall there existed in the first place a grave, and over time there comes the turba and the mosque with service rooms crew around the grave. The mausoleum was built in the 18th century. Only in 1820 the minaret, mimbar and mihrab were added so that the site became a complete mosque.
Can you speak a little bit closer to the microphone? So.
Yeah, okay.
So
the foundation myths, in plural, take off with the conquest of Nicosia by the Ottoman army in 1570. According to one account, Bayraktar, a flag bearer, lifted the Ottoman standard onto the Constanza bastion, but was killing in doing so. Maybe he was buried there. After Nicosia was taken in September 1570, the bastion was named after him, a hero without a personal name, so Bayraktar was used as a name. In later documents, he gets personalized as Kara Mustafa, Mehmet A, and so on. But in the folk tale, the Bayraktar is a very courageous sailor named Deli, that's crazy Chafer. He takes the standard on the bastion and returns safe and sound to Anatolia after the conquest. It would be very instructive to know when the name Bayraktar Burcu for Constanza Bastion started to come in use, or if the myth gained new popularity after the Turkish invasion in Cyprus in 1974. From today's perspective, however, by means of its location and the foundation myth based on that physical fact, the site combines political with religious aspects, not to say this site is predisposed to become a symbol of a religious national identity. The walls are a military fortification, a bulky historical memorial pointing to the beginning of the Turkish-Cypriot relation, or from the Greek Christian point of view, pointing to the beginning of the long Ottoman occupation. The foundation myth takes up this location, adding memorial value to the site in form of an Ottoman, Turkish and Muslim hero. So this was the foundation myth, and now I'm proceeding to 62. In the early hours of March 25th in 1962, bombs exploded at two mosque sites in Nicosia. Whereas the Amaria Mosque was only little affected, the Bayraktar was affected in a very visible way. The minaret and the shrine were partly damaged to that degree that the minaret had to be rebuilt for its biggest part. The bombing of the mosques was not a single or unexpected event. Cyprus had become independent in 1960, but atrocities between the Greek or Rum and the Turkish community of the island had not been stopped by the foundation of one republic. The nationalists on both sides kept campaigning for their main goals, the unification of the island with Greece or the partition of Cyprus in two national states. The deconstruction of religious sites was a core element of this warfare. Furthermore, the 25th of March is the Greek Independence Day. But this time, the Greek side immediately denied any involvement in the incidents. The rumors spread that the Turkish side, the organization for, let's say, unconventional warfare, the Turkish Resistance Organization, was the responsible of the attack with the aim to spur fear, aggression, and activism in the Turkish community for the partition of Cyprus. Whoever had been the responsible for the Bayraktar attack, it was a very suitable choice. But indeed, the choice was so suitable that the rumor had been accepted as true by many people until present. As mentioned before, the site, Bayraktar Mosque, combines elements that can be read as religious, national, and historic at once. The most staunchly national Turkish Cypriot newspaper, Netanya, condensed the nationalist reading of the Bayraktar and the attack on its title page in its next issue, as you can see. Bayraktar bizim için bir semboldür. For us, Bayraktar is a symbol. And you see, of course, the flag bearer and the damage. And this is the complete site. Bayraktar is a symbol for us. It says, as long as there is a Turkish community on this island, as long the warrior Bayraktar with his mosque and his flag will be standing there. Because there was a flag in the shrine and it was, well, it burned too during the attack. So, flag burning is a big offense in Turkey. From this heading and the following text, it becomes evident that this site is not conceived as a religious but as a national site and a historic memorial. In this article here, Bayraktar is not a saint or a religious martyr, but a national war hero. I cannot go into the details here, but if we were to compare the rhetoric to other newspapers of that time, we could see that this is an extreme position. Even the newspaper of the nationalist and later Vice President Fazıl Küçük, the newspaper Halkın Sesi, did not restrict the site to a pure nationalist symbol, but uses religious and historic nationalist vocabulary in equal measure. The conspiracy theory that the Turkish side was the responsible of the attacks was foiled when, in April 1962, two Turkish Cypriot journalists and lawyers were killed. Hikmet and Gürkan were the publishers of a leftist newspaper, and they were champions of a peaceful one-state solution and promoted a common Cypriot identity. In the last issue of the newspaper, they wrote that they would bring down the masks of those who had bombed the mosque. End of quote. In the weeks before, they had been living under death threats, and this Turkish resistance organization had told them that they would be killed. So the case, the murder, was never solved and the assassin never arrested until today. For the anti-nationalists among the Cypriots, the murder of their spokespersons was another evidence of the Turkish conspiracy related to the Bayraktar attack. During the years following, the whole event did not fall into complete oblivion, but no new evidence was produced, neither on the Bayraktar attack nor on the assassinations. Eventually, in 2010, the Bayraktar attack became top news again. During an interview by a popular news channel in Turkey, a retired 82-year-old general, 25oğlu, said that the Turkish military had bombed mosques in Cyprus in the past and then put the blame on the Greeks. Quote, such attacks and sabotages on sacred values are done and portrayed as if the enemy did them, he explained. The purpose is to raise the resistance of the people. And a Turkish newspaper of 2010 then made a comment on this confession, saying that the 82-year-old Yemi Beşoğlu was probably not aware of the possible impact of this revelation, which he made just in passing as if it were a trivial detail. End of quote. So the arousal Yemi Beşoğlu with his few words had caused after all those years has to be related, of course, to the political background in 2010 in Turkey, not in Cyprus. Also, we have a separate mosque. It was the time when the former, more or less Kemalist military and political elite was accused by the relatively new political rulers, a religion-oriented Party of Justice and Development AKP, of a coup d'etat conspiracy called Sledgehammer. Allegedly, the Kemalists had intended to cause unrest in the country in order to regain the power, and among their blended acts of terrorism, the bombing of mosques would have taken place. So in this trial, Yemi Beşoğlu, the retired general, was one of the culprits. Now, in my opinion, the important points about this 2010 Bayraktar revival are that an event in Cyprus is narratively transferred and embedded in the narrative landscape of Turkey. And then the religious character of the Bayraktar Mosque is stressed this time, as the site has become part not of a conflict between two nationalist sides, but between the allegedly laik Kemalists and the religious-oriented new elite of Turkey. So now we already proceed to the last part of my presentation that actually consists of two themes. 2012 was the year of the 50th anniversary of the Bayraktar attack and the assassination of the journalists Hikmet and Gürkan. The story arose once again in newspapers of Turkey and Cyprus, and in Cyprus commemorative meetings were held for the honor of the journalists. The focus of these meetings was, of course, on the journalists and not on the mosque, but the biographies, and what's more, the reading of the biographies is inextricably interwoven with the Bayraktar attack. What deserves closer attention in this case are 2 points. The journalists are upgraded to leftist, in quotation marks, positive national heroes through the comparison with leftist heroes of the time of Turkey, like Deniz Gezmiş and Yusuf İnan, if you heard the names. And secondly, the retrieved Bayraktar Hikmet Gürkan narrative serves as a pretext for criticizing the current condition of the Turkish Cypriot community, in this quotation from a Turkish newspaper. Turkish Cypriots, the author says, have to look back, remember the past, analyze their mistakes, and to regain their original values. And finally, the commemorative figure in this discourse, the current discourse, is not the flag bearer, who symbolizes the Ottoman history, but the journalists as heroes of the short history of the independent Cypriot Republic. Based on my experience in research on memory, I dare to predict that we will see more meetings like these in the years following, with Hikmet and Gürkan as new commemorative figures. As a very last paragraph, I want to turn back to the physical site, the Bayraktar Mosque on the Constanza Bastion. So you remember that the mosque is located nowadays in the mostly Greek-speaking and Christian Orthodox south of Nicosia. But as part of international efforts to secure the historic architecture of Cyprus, among others, the Bayraktar Mosque was completely restored in 2003. The legal owner is the FKAF, the administration of the Peace Foundations in Cyprus, but the FKAF has no office in the south. So the building and the plot are administered by the Antiquities department, again, of the Cypriot government. The building is also used as a place of religious gatherings nowadays, of Friday services and mystic exercises. The community is led by a Turkish Cypriot who is Naqshbandi and follower of the famous Sheikh Nazım al-Kubrisi, But the members of his community are mostly immigrants from several countries, so the common language of preaching and teaching is English. From these short notes, we can anticipate that a new kind of Cypriot Muslimity is emerging currently. I can end this paragraph saying that the head of the Bayraktar community describes the situation in South Cyprus when it comes to religious activities, including Islamic activities. He describes the situation in the south as more satisfying than in the Turkish and Muslim north, and that is because of the religious freedom and the absence of an all-controlling presidency of religious affairs as we have it in Turkey and in Cyprus as well. When I asked him, this head of the community, if there's a conflict with regard to the funfair next to the mosque area, he answered in a very Cypriot way. Well, this is the meanest of our problems. They start making noise after our last prayer in the evening, so we can live with it. I want to end my presentation saying that even a small one-aisle mosque can attract diverse narratives and serve different goals throughout the centuries when A, some basic geographic, historic and political elements are given, and B, the environment, here Cyprus and its population, is rather sensitive towards the symbolic religious and national value of religious sites. This sensitivity, finally, is an acquired pattern, supported, promoted, and exploited by religio-nationalist politicians. But C, the related narratives have to become revised and adapted. There is no power in a site if we don't relate the story or if the story is not heard. And this story has to be comprehensible and convincing to its audience. And this is the end, and thank you for your patience.
Let me thank our presenters for these two wonderful papers, which I think can be put together in terms of, on the one hand, the first paper deals with a kind of administrative structure that is absolutely vital, and then the second paper takes us into the heart of an actual conflict where these different kinds of narratives are taking place. So now we can open the floor to discussion. Who would like to begin? Yes. And you have to speak up loudly.
Was the opposite party before the Atra Kadisha entered the conflict? And if it's only the Haredim who are the opposition, are there other Jewish opinions?
It's only the Haredim, but the Haredim is not one piece. There is a few groups, the Haredim. Atra Kadisha, till last year, is they have the more influence on the bureaucratic, government bureaucratic bodies. But there is one or two Haredi more. That's all. Not Zionist religious.
No. I mean, there's no other line of thought or tradition in Judaism to refer to?
Look, it's not Jewish law, it's Jewish culture. All the violence and all the problems is around Jewish culture. In Barzilai Medical Center, the chief rabbinate permitted to remove the bones, but Atra Kadisha not, and the government have a coalition with Atra Kadisha. Till it was in 2008, 2009, till 2011 that the public and the pressure came.
There is a question.
Yes, go ahead.
In the opening, you mentioned that Israel is the only country in which bones are never, or recently, not examined scientifically. and your discussion of the excavations seemed to focus only on the AA. It wasn't clear, though you mentioned salvage excavations, whether you were talking only about AA-initiated excavations or the Antiquities Authority as a supervising entity over all excavations in the country. And my question is, how has this reality, scientific reality, affected foreign universities' interests in excavations here because of the expected limitations on scientific freedom?
Yeah, very good.
I don't know. I don't know, because it's not in, when I look for something, I look for the reciprocal between Atra Kadisha. What I found is the reciprocal between Atra Kadisha and the government. Not, I didn't ask. I asked, interviewed Atra Kadisha, a person from Atra Kadisha and AA and everything, but not universities. So I don't know what the foreign universities think about it, but, and it's very interesting. It's you can do it. Yes, and but I think the universities, what we saw, the people, the archaeologists that came from the universities are against AA, yeah, because of this coalition, yes. So maybe now we have such a direction. What they think in Israel, the foreign, I think they don't understand what's going on, like the AA archaeologists that say that they don't understand also.
Thank you.
Yes.
I understand that one of the issues is that whereas the archaeologists claim that the Byzantine site, the Atra Kadisha site, no, these are Jewish bones.
Right.
So how to say, I mean, and what is the halakha? The halakha, the halachic position bearing Christian bones in a Jewish way. Who is going to prove what as well?
There is few questions here, but what I can say is, when I interviewed Atra Kadisha, they said we say no about everything, about every bone, because we don't know. So if we don't know, we have a doubt. We're afraid that in a doubt we take now you take advantage on us and Jewish bones, and we say no about everything. So that's it's not Jewish law. It's what I told you, Jewish culture, and not the halachic way, because the halachic way, when we say the halachic way, is you can move bones. If you want to know the halacha, you can move bones. If you have a problem, public problems, like we did in the Itnatkut in Gush Katif, we took all the caves from there, all the graves from there, and Atra Kadisha was silent. Why? If it's halachic. So that's the first question. The first question is the Atra Kadisha say no about everything, and the AA, it's very hard. They don't know what to do with this you know, radical. It's radical stream. It's very hard to deal with something that you don't have a language with him. You know what I mean? So the first is you can move by the halachic, and the second is that Atra Kadisha say you cannot move, and to put in Jewish graves when you have doubt, it's not so big problems. Not so big problem.
Does the Christian bones looks different than a Jewish bone?
No, but the caves.
The caves look good.
The caves look not the same. The caves, A very interesting thing is that you have now secular cemeteries in Israel, in Kibbutzei Nat and others. They put horses by humans, by Jewish humans. The problem is not halachic. It's not halachic, okay? There is other problem that you do a secular ceremony, okay, without prayers, but to put a person, a Jewish person, in a not Jewish, non-Jewish cemetery, it's not a problem, and you have a lot of places in the world that they did like that, and the Rabbanim do it because you don't have choice, so you do it.
Yes, but they're sectioned off. You don't just bury a Jew amongst non-Jewish grave. I mean, I come from Melbourne, Australia, where originally the first cemetery was a non-Jewish cemetery, and the rabbinate at the time bought or leased a section within that cemetery and cordoned it off for the Jewish. There's a path between the two sections. So it's important to mention that yes, you bury within a non-Jewish cemetery, but it's a sacred. It's hudash, it's mukdash. It's consecrated as a Jewish area.
We are not talking about the high-level religious. We're talking.
It's not high level. It's the new.
I was in Russia in 1991, and you can see a lot of cemeteries without any kind of separation. Yeah. So. We are not talking about the high-level religious. We're talking about if we can make a compromise. The Jewish law can do a lot of compromises in those issues. But Atra Kadisha, באמת, the Atra Kadisha came and find a subject that nobody knows about it, and take the leadership, take a leadership, or take a new way. They have a new way of thinking, and nobody knows what to do, even though the rabbinate and what to do with them.
I'm very remiss because I should ask people to identify themselves. So when you raise your hand, if you just give us your name so that we can respond by first names. So your name is?
Michael Bowman.
Okay. So Michael, and your name, sir?
Harry Gluck.
Harry and?
Ophir Yarden.
Okay. And Professor Kark.
To start, just a comment, speaking about mixed burial. We have a good example here at Mount Scopus, the British First World War cemetery, in which you have graves of British soldiers, Christians, you have Muslims, you have Turkish, German, and Jews.
Morial.
Morial Ram, question to Beatrice about the discussion regarding Cypriot Muslimity. And when I talk to Turkish Cypriots, one of the ways they used to differentiate themselves from the Turkish settlers, because there's a big social contestation within modern Cyprus, is the fact that they say, we are secular, they go to mosque. They are bringing this whole culture of going to mosque, they're very religious, we are secular. So I want to ask three short questions regarding the role of the mosque, the Bayraktar mosque which you described. First, is it used in the narrative, the Turkish Cypriot narrative, is it part of the evolving national Turkish Cypriot identity that differentiates itself from the Greek Cypriots and from the Turkish identity? Second, who goes to this mosque? Is it Turkish Cypriots or Turkish or both? And third, I want to learn a little bit more about the role of the Republic of Cyprus, the authorities of the Republic of Cyprus and their relation, how they regulate movement into the mosque, and how do they get involved in the different activities conducted in the mosque.
Yeah, thank you for these questions, which actually lead to a new presentation. But okay, I'll tell you a story about my first meeting with the. Oh, sorry. My first meeting with the, I called him head of the now community at Bayraktar. He himself, well, is called Imam, or the representative of the Presidency of Religious Affairs to the south, and they are different. You see, the complete situation with Islam in Cyprus is actually not under control and not under regulation. And it's a very dynamic process at the moment in both parts, but diversifying processes. And so this head of the community, he is a born Cypriot Turk, or Turkish Cypriot. That's why he can move freely from south to north and can be active. And the first thing I didn't ask him for, but the first thing he related to me was that they are, he and his group and his followers, they are Cypriot Muslims, and that they are not like the settlers. And then I was so puzzled, because I had expected this, you know, Muslim ecumene in Cyprus. Everybody were brothers and sisters. And so he tried to construct himself as a Cypriot toward me. And then he added, of course, no, there's no hatred and we have no problems with the Muslim brethren in the north, but we are different. That is very interesting. And yeah, because we, the Cypriots, we are not fundamentalists, although he is an Naqshbandi, and we are open. And you see, we are speaking English, and everybody can come in, everybody can join, everybody can understand. It's like the German discourse about Islam and speaking German Islam. And so this is a part of the settler discourse. Also, he is changing it or giving it a different move. And who goes? Yes, well, he goes, and I met one Cypriot, a Turkish Cypriot, and I don't know if there are more, but they are talking about more people coming now. It's also a matter of places. This one was restored in 2003, and so there are not many mosques, functioning mosques. They have to care for the mosque themselves, and someone has to have the key and to enter and to open it and to clean it, and it's a kind of organization matter. But I think that until now the bigger part are the migrants from different countries. But the migrants have the choice to join different Muslim groups. And so they, by their choice, they join this more Cypriot mystic community. So, but I tell you, there is no research on Islam in Cyprus, particularly not in the south. There's some research on Ottoman institutions, and people tell me, well, there's research on Islam, but this is not what I'm talking about. These are the communities in the south, and we don't know what is going on. Hopefully we'll. And then last, authorities. Yeah, that's the problem. We have the owner of the mosques and the mosque areas and all by terms of legislation is the FKAF. But the FKAF has the office in the north, and biggest part of the employees of the FKAF are from Turkey. So they're not entitled to come to the south, and also they refuse to open an office in the representation in the south because we have one. Why should we open a second one? So there is no communication actually on official level between the FKAF and the Cypriot government. So there is the Antiquities department in the south, And they have the official cooperation with the funding institutions for all this restoration work going on. And also they care for the upkeeping of the mosque. And if, for example, there is a technical problem with the mosque, they phone the Antiquities department and they come in. But this means, of course, that also there's an ongoing discussion about the opening hours and the new, well, the use and the times and so on. It's not so at peace, the situation at the moment, but this is difficult to understand in detail.
Yitzhak.
You know, when I was listening to your presentation, it reminded me the case of the Shihabuddin Tomb Mosque in Nazareth, in which you find a fascinating combination of space, political actors who are also some of them religious actors, and narrative, the changing of narrative. And I wonder if you can say something about the actors, religious actors or political actors, sometimes they are the same, regarding your case study.
Yes, the actors and the character, now the qualities of the actors are of course changing throughout the decades. So the actors at the moment, we just mentioned, with the well, the bureaucratic institutions, and then the freelance imams and Muslim groups, and then I mentioned these commemorative meetings for the journalists, which is somehow interwoven with the Bayraktar, and these are Turkish Cypriots living in the north, and they are the Turkish, well, this part of the Turkish Cypriots, they have a kind of more leftist secular identity, and so they have their commemorative figures in Turkey are the heroes of the 70s, which were underwent death penalty later. And so then, well, we have in the north the presidency, which is of religious affairs, which is like the presidency in Turkey, a very controlling body, and in Cyprus heavily influenced by politics. They only say what they are told to say by the government, and they control the mosques, but they give, in this case particularly, the settlers, what the settlers are in need, because they have some kind of spiritual need in this very tense situation in northern Cyprus. But they control the teaching at the schools, and the Friday sermons, they are given in advance by the imams to the local imams and so on. And then when we go back in history, we see this intermingling of the religious and nationalist discourse, particularly by figures like Fazıl Küçük, the only Turkish vice president, and later on somehow by Denktaş also, late Denktaş. They are using heavily religious vocabulary or sites like mosques, but they combine it with all these nationalist symbols. So we have to have Turkish and Cypriot flags at the mosques, and sometimes you don't know if they are talking about religious martyrs or nationalist martyrs, and that's an intended misunderstanding. So you get all the groups of the community, and but they weren't after any spiritual strengthening of the people, or this aspect of religion is completely foreign to them. Yeah, and nowadays we have a kind of influence from this liberal conservative Islamic standing from Turkey, from the AKP, but we do not really know how it's influencing. I mean, we cannot tell.
I have a quick question to Eliav, with your permission. You spoke about the IAA perspective, but I would like to learn more about the Atra Kadisha perspective. According to your figures, there are 50% end with changing of the plans. I conclude that the other 50%, there are some compromises that Atra Kadisha is doing. So since you are also a rabbi, tell us what are the, I would say, the criteria regarding bones, graves, I don't know, that Atra Kadisha is ready to do these compromises.
The criteria is the problem. If somebody would know the criteria, he can win the Atra Kadisha. Can win Atra Kadisha. The idea is that Atra Kadisha, nobody understands when this group can make the compromise. When? I can tell you that in Tel Aviv, they started to Atra Kadisha started, and in Nesher, also in Nesher, and in Tel Aviv, the Atra Kadisha started to be AA. They started to dig. They want to open a museum in Tel Aviv. It's now I'm telling you something from the last year. So it's not only a criteria. It's now you can understand. They want to be in charge. That's all. They want to be in charge, and because of that, we can see in the last year, we can see that internet sites, Haredi internet sites, doing a lot of noise, a lot of they criticize Atra Kadisha. It wasn't before. It wasn't before. Only the last year. Chadrei Charedim is one site, and the other site, I don't remember his name. I have it. They started to say what's going on with the Atra Kadisha. Atra Kadisha was against. Now they started to dig. They said.
Is money involved? I mean, I know in one case at the Palace Hotel, which is now reconstructed as a hotel, Waldorf Astoria, a year or 2 years ago when they started to dig, they found 3 graves underneath. It was not published. And the head of Atra Kadisha arrived to the spot, and a colleague of us convinced him that the bones, since they look to Mecca, to the south, they are non-Jewish bones, and okay, he said, okay, I have no problem. You can do whatever you want. And since the contractor there is a wealthy person and company, I wonder if some money was channeled, around. This is my hunch. I'm not sure, but perhaps you have some evidence for it.
I can tell you that people that work for Atra Kadisha also work for the government. Okay? So, for example, I know a person that belongs to Atra Kadisha, and I can tell you a simple example. The head of Atra Kadisha, Rav Shmidel, is in charge of Har HaZeitim, Olive Mountain, and got salary from the government. It's from It's all. It's again 30 years, I think. I know somebody else that got. I know his name. I know him. That got a salary from a religious office, religious affairs office, and belongs to Atra Kadisha, working for Atra Kadisha. So I don't know if black money is going there, but around. But you can see that there is a connection that between a very hard connection.
Very interesting. It reminds me the relationship between the Sharia court and the Islamic movement in Israel. Mm-hmm. Some of the Islamist activists are being appointed by the Sharia court to serve as arbitrators for money.
Mm-hmm. So, I'm mindful that already Mose and Masha have questions, and others you've raised your hands as well. But my task as a sort of moderator here is to watch the clock. And we have come to the hour 11 o'clock sharp. And so this is the time when we have to make our first break. Questions that we have can come up in other discussions, of course. And we're going to take a 15-minute coffee break, and we're going to reconvene sharply, promptly, at 11:15. Thank you.